Japan 1645. Miyamoto Musashi was 62 years old and knew he would die soon. His body marked by more than 60 duels, no defeats. He dragged himself to a cave in the Reigando Mountains, completely alone. No disciples around, no family waiting for his last words. And it was in this absolute solitude that he wrote 21 lines that would travel 400 years to reach you. But it wasn't about how to win fights. It was about how to reprogram your mind to never again depend on anyone, never again freeze under pressure, never again break when everything crumbles. Musashi was leaving a map of how to rebuild a life from scratch when nothing remains but you and the silence. Musashi didn't start out invincible. At 13, he defeated his first opponent in a duel, but he was lucky. It wasn't pure skill. From 20 to 29, he was good with the sword, but terrible with his mind. His mentality was kill or be killed. He didn't yet have the concept of hey-ho, strategy as a way of life. He won through brute force, speed, and intimidation, not through the calm reading of his opponent that he would later develop. He had technique, but no inner control, until he discovered something the Japanese had known for centuries. It wasn't secret combat techniques. It was 4 philosophical principles that completely reprogrammed how he viewed progress, purpose, imperfection, and loneliness. Kaizen, transformation through the imperceptible. Ikigai, the reason you wake up in the morning. Wabi-Sabi, radical peace with what is broken, and the path of walking alone without depending on anyone to continue. Of course, Musashi didn't know all these concepts as we know them today. For example, we know that Kaizen is a modern concept, popularized after World War II, but Musashi followed the concept of Shugyo, which is like the grandfather of Kaizen. Shugyo. This refers to austere and disciplined training. Musashi wasn't just looking to improve a process, he was seeking to forge the spirit and technique through exhaustive repetition and correction of flaws. And regarding the term Ikigai, did Musashi know the word? Probably not as we use it today. The term Ikigai has ancient roots from the Heian period, but in Musashi's time, it wasn't a self-help concept with diagrams. However, he is the perfect example of the concept. His Ikigai was the way of the sword, Kendo. For us, Ikigai is about balance and happiness. For Musashi, it was about obsession and sacrifice. He writes in the Dokodo, the way of solitude, "Do not seek pleasure for its own sake." His life's purpose was mastery, not personal happiness. Musashi applied these 4 concepts during years of real battles, not motivational metaphors. And when he wrote his last teachings in that cave, he wasn't leaving a combat manual. He was leaving a map for those who need to rebuild their lives when everything falls apart. And today, 400 years later, what Musashi wrote serves as a map for our lives, to free us from the need for acceptance, the need for external validation, to free us from the need to live to please everyone around us, often leaving our own dreams aside. The Dokodo. It was not a path for those who walk alone, a testament to how to win battles. It was a manifesto on how to live when no one else is by your side, when there is no audience, when there is no applause, when all that's left is you and the truth naked of its existence. Musashi did not. I was teaching how to be alone. It was revealing that true strength. It is only born when you stop needing it. Validation from the company, of the approval from others, to keep walking. The modern world lives in panic over this, loneliness. Just look around. People. They check their cell phones more than 150 times a day. Not out of necessity, but out of fear of silence. With each notification, a confirmation that they still exist, that they still matter. Studies show that young adults spend an average of 7 hours daily posts on social media, no connecting deeply with no one, but desperately avoiding the experience of being with oneself. Relationships are maintained not by love, but out of terror of the void. Careers. They are chosen not on purpose, but by status. Opinions are formed not by conviction, but by consensus. And in the midst of all this, Musashi, 4 centuries ago, we already knew about the disease that affects us. It would corrode. It's not loneliness, It's the inability to walk alone. There was a word that Musashi never. He used it but lived until his last breath. Jiriki, self-effort, absolute self-sufficiency, not as arrogance but as radical freedom. Jiriki is the understanding that no one he will come to save you. It's the understanding that there are things no one can do for you. There is no secret master. There is no magic opportunity. There is no the perfect moment. There's only you, the path ahead, and the choice to give the next step or remain still waiting, have someone carry you. Chapter 1. The Collapse. When technique is not enough. Musashi was approximately 28 or 29 years old when he faced Sasaki Kojiro, considered the best swordsman in Japan. Kojiro was technical, precise, perfect. His movements were calculated with mathematical precision. Musashi was chaotic, improvised, unpredictable, and Musashi won. Not because he was technically superior, but because Kojiro expected perfection and Musashi embraced chaos. Kojiro froze when the unexpected happened. Musashi kept moving. Now San Francisco, 2019. I'm going to tell you Marcus's story. Marcus was sitting in his kitchen at home, 31 years old, a product manager at a promising startup, 3 years building something that finally seemed to be working, until the pandemic hit. The company cut 40% of its team in March 2020. Marcus was on the list, and the worst part wasn't losing his job. It was realizing that his entire identity was built on that position. Without that position, who was Marcus? His girlfriend Rebecca tried to support him in the first few months, but Marcus was paralyzed. He sent out resumes non-stop, always waiting for the perfect job, the ideal salary, the right company. Weeks went by without a response. Marcus had all the skills. He knew how to pitch to investors, how to build products, how to lead teams. But when the real pressure came, he broke. He made bad decisions, gave up halfway through, and depended on external validation to continue. And now he was there alone, realizing what Musashi realized at age 20. Knowledge without mental control is like a sword without a hilt. You can't hold it. Rebecca left in June, not because Marcus lost his job, but because he lost the ability to move forward. She grew tired of seeing someone with so much potential sink into self-pity. In the first months after the breakdown, Marcus tried the obvious path, massive doses of motivation. He watched videos of motivational speakers yelling at him to wake up at 5 a.m., work out, take a cold shower, and conquer the day. It worked for 3 days. On the 4th day, he would wake up at 11, do nothing, and feel worse than before, because motivation is cheap fuel. It burns quickly and leaves you feeling emptier. Marcus needed something structural, something that would change not what he did, but how he thought. And that's when he found an abandoned book in a cafe, The Way of the Lone Warrior, about Musashi and the principles he applied to never lose again. Marcus opened to the first page and read something that paralyzed him. Accept everything as it is. Never stray from the path. Respect Buddha and the gods, but do not count on their help. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Marcus turned the page and began with the first principle. Chapter 2. Kaizen, the Invisible Reconstruction. When Musashi was 13 years old, he defeated his first opponent, Arima Kihei, an adult and experienced samurai. Musashi won, but not through refined technique. He won through brutality, instinct, and luck. He threw Arima to the ground and beat him with a piece of wood. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't honorable, it wasn't what the masters taught. It was chaotic and desperate, and Musashi knew it. In the following years, he won more duels. At 16, he defeated Tadashima Akiyama and his 3 disciples in Tajima. But these early victories created a dangerous problem. Musashi began to believe that brute force and courage were enough. That technique didn't matter as much as the will to win. And this almost killed him, because in his first duels he faced competent opponents but not true masters. When he began to face swordsmen from established schools, he realized something brutal. He won, but by increasingly smaller margins. He was surviving, not dominating. At 21, Musashi faced Yoshioka Seijuro, leader of the prestigious Yoshioka school in Kyoto. It was the most important duel of his life up to that point. and Musashi won by breaking Seijuro's arm with a bokken strike. But he left the duel knowing that he had won through aggression, not mastery. And that against an even better opponent, aggression would not be enough. It was there that Musashi realized, great leaps in skill don't happen. Mastery is built through microscopic adjustments, obsessively repeated. After that duel, Musashi completely changed his approach. He stopped trying to master dozens of new movements simultaneously. He chose a single principle, a single movement, a single concept, and he trained that for weeks, sometimes months. This was Kaizen before it had a name. Transformation through daily improvement, small changes that the brain cannot resist, so constant that they become inevitable. Between the ages of 21 and 29, Musashi perfected this approach. While other samurai trained trying to constantly learn new techniques, Musashi took a single principle, timing, distance, posture, and refined it 1% per day for months. And when he finally faced Sasaki Kojiro at age 29, considered the best swordsman in Japan, Musashi won not because he was stronger or faster. Musashi won through psychological strategy and by mastering every micro-movement. Marcus read that and his first reaction was ridiculous. He needed big, fast results. He needed a new job, money coming in, validation that he was still capable. But he was desperate enough to try. First week, Marcus didn't try to find a job yet. He didn't create a perfect resume. He didn't do aggressive networking. He committed to something absurdly small, opening LinkedIn for 2 minutes a day, just opening it. No pressure to send resumes, no expectations, no judgment. Just looking. It seemed pathetic, but he did it. Second week, still 2 minutes, but now he was reading a job posting. Any job posting. He didn't need to apply, it didn't need to be relevant. Just read. Third week, he started updating his profile, one line at a time. It could be changing a comma, adding a word, correcting a space. It didn't matter. What mattered was the daily movement, not its size. On the 24th, Marcus sent an application, not because someone forced him, not because he watched a motivational video, but because the resistance had disappeared. His brain no longer saw it as a threat. It was just the natural continuation of a microscopic habit that had been running for weeks. Musashi did this with the sword for years after his duel with Kojiro. He never stopped training, but he never tried to change everything at once. One adjustment at a time, one principle at a time, one movement at a time. And in the end, the distance between him and any other swordsman was impossible to close. Not because he was born with divine talent, but because he never stopped moving. Even at 60 years old, shortly before his death, Musashi still practiced basic movements daily. Not to learn something new, but to refine what he already knew by 1% more. Marcus started applying Kaizen to everything. Messy apartment? He tidied up a little at a time, and in a week the kitchen was spotless. Out of shape? 10 push-ups a day. In a month, it was 300 effortlessly. Chaotic finances, one account analyzed per day, and so on. Maybe you do the opposite. You look at your life and think, I need to change everything. I need to lose 15 kilos, build a business, learn a new skill, fix my relationship, organize my life. And your brain shuts down because the scale of the change activates the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting threats. And a big change is interpreted as a threat, so you do nothing. Or you do everything for 3 days and give up because the effort is unsustainable. Kaizen says, forget big leaps, move 1%. But move every day without exception. The secret is not in the size of the action, it's in its unwavering consistency. Chapter 3. Ikigai, the purpose no one tells you. As I said, Musashi won his first duel at age 13, and for the next 16 years, from 1597 to 1613, he became a killing machine. He traveled throughout Japan on a warrior pilgrimage, hunting opponents to test his strength. At 21, he destroyed Yoshioka Seijuro, then his brother Denshichiro, and finally the 12-year-old boy Yoshioka Matashichiro, along with dozens of members of the Yoshioka school, at the Battle of Ichijoji Pine. It was a massacre. Musashi was building his reputation through blood. He faced the spear monks of the Hozoin Temple in Nara, considered the best spearmen in Japan. He defeated Shishido Bacon, master of the sickle and chain. Wherever there was a skilled swordsman, Musashi appeared, challenged, and conquered. Samurai feared him, daimyos knew his name. But during all those years between the ages of 13 and 28, Musashi was merely surviving and winning. He didn't understand why. He fought because, in a way, he was good at it. Because it was the only thing he knew how to do. Because winning made him feel alive. After the duel against Kojiro, Musashi did something strange. He stopped accepting new duels. For almost 10 years, between the ages of 30 and 40, Musashi disappeared from the life of duels. Not because he was afraid, but because he realized something brutal. He had won 60 duels, killed dozens of men, built a terrifying reputation, and he was completely empty. Victory without purpose is just noise. He writes in the Book of 5 Rings, "When I reached 30, I looked back on my past. My previous victories were not due to having mastered strategy perfectly." Musashi realized that even having trained incessantly, he had been a talented animal, not a master. It was during that decade, between the ages of 30 and 40, that Musashi began to transform fighting into something greater. He didn't stop training, but he changed his focus. He began to study other arts, calligraphy, painting, sculpture, poetry. Not as a hobby, but because he realized that the way of the sword was inseparable from the way of life. And it was there that he found what the Japanese would call Ikigai, although he never used that word. Musashi loved studying strategy, the universal principles behind combat. He was exceptionally good at reading opponents, predicting movements, adapting instantly. Feudal Japan needed someone who taught discipline and real control, not just empty techniques. And daimyos paid handsomely for it. Musashi spent the last years of his life serving the Hosokawa clan, not as a warrior, but as a strategist and teacher. This intersection became his guiding principle at age 40, and only at 50, as he himself admits in the Book of 5 Rings, did he finally understand the principle of the way of strategy. Marcus, 3 months after starting Kaizen, had 4 interviews scheduled. But something was wrong. He felt nothing. No anxiety, no excitement, no fear. It was as if he were on autopilot, applying for jobs that paid well but meant absolutely nothing. And that's when he read about Musashi's transformation in Chapter 3 of the book, how Musashi spent 16 years winning without knowing why, until he realized at 30 that victory without purpose is empty. Marcus realized something devastating. He was repeating the pattern. He had never asked himself these questions. He chose a career in tech because it paid well and because everyone in San Francisco was doing it. But he never loved it. He tolerated it. Marcus spent an entire week alone in his apartment, answering the 4 questions with brutal honesty. What did he love? Teaching. Since childhood, he had always been the guy who explained complex things simply. Math to colleagues, business concepts to friends, product strategies to juniors. What was he good at? Structuring processes, taking chaos and transforming it into clarity, taking complexity and simplifying it. What did the world need? People who don't know how to start building something on their own, who have the idea but not the map. What would they pay for? Consulting, mentoring, courses for budding entrepreneurs. Marcus no longer wanted to be a product manager. He wanted to teach people how to build products from scratch, and for the first time in 8 months, he felt something real. It wasn't temporary motivation, it was permanent direction. Ikigai isn't about finding your passion and blindly following it like a dog chasing a car. It's about finding the precise intersection between what you do well, what has real value in the world, and what makes you feel alive. Without that intersection, you can make money, but you'll slowly die inside, or you can love what you do, but you'll starve. Ikigai is the relentless balance between these forces. Marcus cancelled all 4 interviews. He sent polite emails declining applications, and he started something radically different. He wrote Twitter threads, teaching product development concepts, short posts, 280 characters, 1% per day. Kaizen applied to Ikigai. He didn't expect followers, he didn't expect validation. He did it because it was the right path. In 6 weeks, he had 1,200 followers. In 3 months, he received his first consulting offer, $2,000 for 4 sessions. It didn't pay like his old job, which paid $12,000 a month. But Marcus woke up with energy for the first time since March 2020. And you? Do you have Ikigai? Or are you living on autopilot, doing what pays but kills you inside, waking up every day without knowing why? Musashi spent 16 years winning duels to realize that victory without purpose is empty. He spent more than 20 years refining his understanding, and only at 50 did he finally understand. You have two options: spend decades like Musashi did, learning the hard way, or answer the 4 questions now and save 30 years. Chapter 4. Wabi-Sabi, Peace with the Imperfect. Towards the end of his life, when Musashi wrote Dokudo, he wrote principles that perfectly capture Wabi-Sabi. Do not seek pleasure in itself. Do not have personal preferences in anything. He was saying, the pursuit of perfection and elegance is imprisonment. The effective warrior uses what works, not what is beautiful. In the following years, Musashi developed the Niten Ichi Ryu, 2 swords style, which at the time was considered strange and unorthodox. Traditional swordmasters criticized it, but Musashi didn't care about aesthetic approval. He cared about effectiveness. He also dedicated himself to arts such as calligraphy, painting, and sculpture. And his works are marked by a deliberately imperfect style, quick and irregular brushstrokes, intentional asymmetry, empty spaces. This was Wabi-Sabi in practice, finding beauty and strength in what is imperfect, unfinished, asymmetrical. One of his most famous paintings, Shrike on a Dead Branch, uses only a few minimalist brushstrokes. It looks unfinished, and that's exactly why it's powerful. Marcus was growing. 6 months after finding his Ikigai, I had 3 paying clients, consistent content on Twitter, revenue covering all basic expenses, nothing explosive, but sustainable. Kaizen working. But something started to hold him back again. This time, it wasn't a lack of direction. It was paralyzing perfectionism. He would spend 4 hours rewriting a 280-character tweet. I postponed launching a digital course because it wasn't good enough yet. He would record videos and delete them because the lighting wasn't perfect. He compared himself to creators who had 100,000 followers and thought, I'll never get there. Why am I trying? And it was there that he read about Musashi versus Kojiro in chapter 4 of the book. How Kojiro lost not despite being perfect, but because he was perfect. How Musashi won not despite being imperfect, but because he accepted imperfection as strength. Marcus realized he was becoming Kojiro, obsessed with technical perfection, paralyzed by the need for aesthetic approval, vulnerable because everything needed to be flawless before acting. Marcus was desperately trying to hide his flaws, the fact that he had been fired, that he had failed to maintain the relationship, that he was starting over from scratch at 31 while former colleagues were being promoted. He thought he needed to pretend he had always been successful, that he had never failed, that he had always known everything so that people would respect him. But Wabi-Sabi, as Musashi demonstrated in the duel, said exactly the opposite. Imperfection is strength, not weakness. Marcus did something that terrified him. He wrote a thread recounting everything: the humiliating dismissal via Zoom, the breakup after 5 years, the 4 months paralyzed, doing nothing, the days crying alone in the empty apartment, the rejected job applications, the dwindling bank account, and he posted it at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, without editing 50 times, without asking anyone's opinion. Like Musashi with his crude ore, imperfect but real, and he went to sleep certain he had committed professional suicide. He woke up to his phone exploding. The tweet had 50,000 views, 800 comments, and almost all of them said the same thing. Me too. I'm going through this right now. Thank you for being honest. You just described my life. Marcus realized something brutal. People don't connect with your manufactured perfection. They connect with your honest imperfection, because everyone has cracks, and when you hide yours, they feel alone in theirs. But when you show them, they breathe a sigh of relief. It's not just me. Wabi-Sabi isn't about accepting mediocrity and ceasing to improve. It's about accepting that effectiveness matters more than aesthetic perfection, Musashi could have waited years to perfectly master 2 swords before using them in a duel, but he used them imperfectly and refined them as he fought. Marcus stopped postponing the course. He launched the first imperfect version, 4 lessons recorded on his cell phone, slides on free Canva, audio with background noise, like Musashi's wooden paddle, and he sold it to 12 people at $97 each, 1,164, and he used the feedback from those 12 people to improve version 2, which he sold to 34 people, which generated feedback for version 3. Kaizen applied to Wabi-Sabi. Continuous improvement starting from imperfection, not waiting for perfection. Are you paralyzed by perfectionism right now? Do you have an idea, a project, a dream, but you don't execute it because it's not good enough yet? Kojiro had the perfect technique and died. Musashi had a crude ore and lived. Wabi-Sabi gives you radical permission to be strategically imperfect, not as an excuse to do things poorly, but as freedom to start with what you have and refine along the way. Because starting imperfect and improving 1% per day is infinitely superior to waiting for perfection and never starting. Chapter 5. The Solitary Path, the Strength of Not Needing. Musashi walked alone for most of his life, not because he hated people, but because life taught him that dependence is vulnerability. He was born in 1584 into a samurai family, but his father, Shinmen Munisai, abandoned him as a child to serve a daimyo. His mother died when he was very young. Musashi grew up being raised by an uncle, but at the age of 13, after killing Arima Kihei in their first duel, he was effectively expelled from the village. Too young to be officially accepted into any clan, too old to be considered a child. He didn't initially choose solitude. Solitude was imposed upon him. This forced solitude could have destroyed him, but it did the opposite. It taught him something that warriors with teams often don't learn. You are only truly strong when you don't need anyone to survive. After the duel with Kojiro at age 29, Musashi disappeared from the public life of dueling. We don't know exactly where he was or what he did, but historical records show that he traveled alone, studied alone, trained alone. He developed the style, 2 swords, completely alone, without a school, without students, without external feedback. At age 50, Musashi finally agreed to serve the Hosokawa clan in Kumamoto, not as a frontline warrior, but as a strategist and advisor. In 1645, at the age of 62, knowing that death was near, Musashi completely isolated himself. He went to the Reigando cave in the mountains, completely alone, and it was in this absolute solitude that he wrote the Dokodo, The Way of Walking Alone, 21 principles for those who depend on no one. The first principle, never stray from the path. Musashi was saying, stay firm on the path you have chosen. It doesn't matter if other paths seem easier, more popular, or safer. If you have chosen it, walk it to the end. The 10th principle, have no preferences. And emphasizing indifference and a lack of attachment to specific tastes or desires, focusing on impartiality and detachment. These weren't theoretical pieces of advice. They were lessons learned from years of walking alone. Musashi knew that people come and go. Masters die, clans fall, friends betray, not out of malice, but because life is impermanent. And if your strength depends on the presence of others when they are gone, and they always are, you crumble. Musashi died alone in that cave in 1645, with no one holding his hand, without his dramatic last words recorded. But he didn't die lonely. He died free, because he had built something that no one could take away. Absolute autonomy. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the people you love aren't important, that you need to isolate yourself from the world. That's not it. I'm telling you not to depend on people. I'm telling you not to create expectations of people because, unfortunately, people come and go. Also, don't seek external validation because this incessant search is the ruin of many people. Marcus was rebuilt. He had Kaizen keeping him moving forward. He had Ikigai giving him clear direction. He had Wabi-Sabi allowing for imperfection. A year and a half after the breakdown, he was earning $8,000 a month teaching product development. It wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom. But there was a crack he hadn't yet faced: residual emotional dependence. He still checked Rebecca's Instagram every day. He still waited for former colleagues to invite him to events. He still needed likes on his posts to know if he was doing well. He still measured progress by comparing himself to others. And that's when Marcus remembered this quote from Musashi, "Accept nothing but the path you have chosen." And he realized he had chosen this path of building on his own, of teaching, of creating content. But he was still constantly looking around, comparing himself, seeking approval, measuring himself against external benchmarks. Musashi said, "If you have chosen the path, follow it to the end." Marcus did something radical. He deactivated Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. He stopped checking who was growing faster, who had raised investment, who had been promoted. He stopped comparing. And for the first time, he felt inner silence. Not emptiness, but peace. Because there was no more external noise telling him he was behind, that he should be somewhere else, that others were doing better. There was only him and the path. Marcus wrote in his diary, "They are on their path, I am on mine. If I need to look to the sides to know if I'm doing well, I never will." And he stopped stalking profiles, stopped asking about others, stopped measuring himself externally. Another principle of Dokodo that destroyed Marcus: do not seek pleasure in itself. Musashi wasn't saying to be miserable. He was saying don't depend on pleasure to continue, because pleasure is temporary fuel, it comes and goes, but the path doesn't stop when the pleasure ends. Marcus realized he was depending on the dopamine from likes, positive comments, and new clients to feel good. And on days without dopamine, he froze. He stopped working, spiraling into self-pity. Musashi, who spent decades without an audience, knew, build something bigger than pleasure. Build commitment. Do the work on good days and bad days, without negotiation. Marcus began to work regardless of how he felt. Sad, he worked. Happy, he worked. Unmotivated, he worked. Motivated, he worked. His emotional state ceased to dictate his actions. Marcus finally understood that the path wasn't about rejecting help or never collaborating. It was about building such solid inner strength that you can stand on your own. And when you can stand on your own, you can choose to walk with others out of love, not out of necessity. You can build with people because your paths align, not because you need them to exist. Marcus no longer needed Rebecca to feel complete. He didn't need external validation to know he was progressing. He didn't need crowds applauding to keep creating. He had become self-sufficient internally. And that didn't make him cold. It made him free. Because when you don't need anyone to keep going, no one can stop you. That's the ultimate paradox of the solitary path Musashi discovered through years of forced solitude that became a chosen one. When you learn to walk alone, you can finally walk with others without fear of them leaving. Because you know that if they leave, you continue. Not out of stubbornness, but because the path is yours. It always was. It always will be. Everything I said above isn't just nice quotes from Musashi's life. Science proves it. Let's look at what science says. Dr. Robert Maurer, a psychologist at UCLA and expert in Kaizen applied to behavioral change, explains, the human brain has a primitive structure called the amygdala that detects threats to survival. Large changes activate the amygdala and generate immediate psychological resistance. But microscopic changes of 1% completely fool it, allowing new behaviors to take hold without internal struggle. Regarding Ikigai, Japanese researchers studied communities in Okinawa and other parts of Japan, regions with the highest concentration of centenarians in the world, for years. They discovered that most respondents over 100 years old had a clear and immediate answer to the question, why do you wake up in the morning? It wasn't superior genetics, it wasn't a special diet. It was a clear purpose. People who didn't have Ikigai had a significantly higher risk of dying from cardiovascular disease, about 50–60% higher than those who did. Wabi-Sabi finds validation in Brené Brown's studies on vulnerability and authenticity. I've discovered that the most fulfilled and connected people aren't the ones who hide imperfections. They're the ones who deliberately show them, because shared imperfection creates real human connection. Manufactured perfection only creates distance and loneliness. And what about walking alone? Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman explains, Self-reliance strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making, emotional control, and resilience. Constant dependence on external validation keeps the amygdala in a state of chronic alert, generating persistent anxiety and weakening the ability to make independent decisions. Musashi didn't understand anything about neuroscience. However, he had 60 real duels, and battles teach what laboratories only confirm. Marcus applied the 4 principles for 24 consecutive months. Kaizen, maintaining a 1% daily improvement. Ikigai, providing unwavering direction. Wabi-Sabi, allowing productive imperfection. And the solitary path, building solid inner strength. And something unexpected happened. Rebecca texted him, not asking him to come back, but saying she had followed his growth from afar and was genuinely proud. Marcus read the message 3 times and felt nothing. No residual anger, no nostalgic longing, no desire to resume. Just peaceful neutrality, because he no longer needed that to feel whole. 2.5 years after the March 2020 collapse, Marcus was earning $15,000 a month, teaching people how to build products on their own, because he applied 1% per day for 9-12 days straight. But there's an important detail about these 4 principles. They can work in isolation, but they are enhanced when combined. These principles need to work together simultaneously, like gears. Kaizen without Ikigai is movement without direction. You go in circles. Ikigai without Wabi-Sabi is paralyzing perfectionism. You never start. Wabi-Sabi without Kaizen is acceptance that turns into complacency. You stop improving, and walking alone without the other 3 is just unproductive solitude. But what happens when you combine all 4? When you move 1% each day towards your Ikigai, accepting imperfection along the way, without depending on anyone to validate the process, you become unstoppable, not invincible. Musashi died like any human, but unstoppable, because nothing external can stop you when everything you need to continue is within you. So here's exactly what you're going to do. First, choose an area of your life that is completely stuck right now. Not all areas, just one. Career, health, relationships, finances, creativity. 1. And apply Kaizen. What is the smallest possible move you can make in that area today? Not the ideal move, not the impressive move, the smallest. If it's a stuck career, it's not creating the perfect resume. It's opening LinkedIn for 2 minutes every day. If it's health, it's not going to the gym 5 times a week. It's doing 10 push-ups a day. Do that movement today, and tomorrow, and the day after, without increasing it until it becomes an unconscious habit. Second, answer the 4 Ikigai questions with radical honesty, not with what seems impressive. What do you genuinely love to do, even without getting paid? What are you objectively good at that people recognize? What does the world around you really need right now? What would people pay real money for? The intersection of these 4 answers is your true north in a professional sense, as I've explained in older videos. Not what your parents want, not what the market glorifies. Yours. Third, stop waiting to be ready to start. Wabi-Sabi gives you radical permission. You will never be ready. Start imperfect. Launch the ugly version of your product. Publish amateur content. Start the uncomfortable conversation. And use the brutal feedback of reality to improve 1% per day. Perfection is prison. Improving imperfection is freedom. Fourth, cut off an emotional dependency today. I ask you, are you building with people or depending on them to feel whole? Stop checking the social media of ex-girlfriends or ex-boyfriends. Stop measuring your progress by comparing yourself to others. Stop waiting for external validation to know if you're doing well. Build such solid inner strength that you can stand completely alone. And when you achieve that, you can choose to walk with others out of love, not out of need. Marcus didn't become a different person in 2 years. He simply systematically reprogrammed how he viewed those 4 pillars. And you can do exactly the same. Not in a day, not in a week, but 1% per day, Kaizen applied, for 365 days, puts you in a completely different universe. The final question is, will you wait for life to force you to change as it forced Musashi and Marcus? Or will you start today with a microscopic movement and let time and consistency do the rest. Musashi died alone in that cave in 1645. But he didn't die lonely. He died free. Free from needing validation, free from needing an audience, free from freezing under pressure. And that freedom he achieved through years of applying those principles has remained intact for 400 years. It reached Marcus in 2020, and it's reaching you now. Take advantage of it. Live that freedom. Build your future. If you've watched this video this far, thank you so much for your attention. Start applying these 4 principles and watch your life change radically. Again, thank you for your time. See you in the next video.